Welcome, everybody, to an all-new episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Thank you so much for joining me as I take my weekly look at everything going on in the world of combat sports. There's a bunch to talk about. This is going to be our wrap-up show for 2025. We got some stuff to talk about, action coming up this week. We'll even hit some action coming up in the beginning of next year, but we might not have a chance to talk to you about before we see you in 2026. We'll preview some stuff coming down the pike, some fights we have heard about. And so I'm going to start off talking first when we talk about Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua matching up tonight on Netflix. Big fight there down in Miami in boxing. Then we're going to recap what we saw at UFC Fight Night between Brandon Royval and Manel Kape out there in Vegas for the UFC's final show of 2025, final show of the ESPN era of that TV deal. They move on to Paramount Plus going into the new year, and we'll see them at the end of January again. We will also recap what we saw with PFL Lyon out there in France, PFL having the finals of their European tournaments, two of the ones that they were running throughout 2025. But what we're going to focus on more so is, of course, the headliners, where we had two titles on the line at both men's heavyweight and women's featherweight. We'll talk about who won those belts going into the new year. We'll also recap briefly what we saw in the main event for BKFC Fight Night Derby between Cooke and Holmes, going for that UK light heavyweight title. We'll touch on the main event we're going to see this week for the BKFC, which is a fight night at the Mohegan Sun up in Connecticut. Big boys throwing down heavyweights. Little change to who's going to be fighting in that one as we get Porter versus Garrett. We'll preview that fight. And we will also talk about fights that the BKFC announced for Knucklemania. Big press conference they had in Philly this week. We'll talk about the top three fights they have announced for that card. We know some more. We've got some other information here, there, some other fights throughout the card with guys talking at that press conference. But we're going to focus on just the top three for now, as we got time before that thing is fully functioning and going in February. We're also going to preview a little bit, as I said, touch on that women's card we have January 3rd, which is going to be a big card for the ladies down in Puerto Rico. That's going to be an interesting one. We'll touch on some of the main fights in that and some other fights and some other news that we have gotten throughout the world of combat sports. Got a little bit of everything. We got some PFL, we got some UFC, we got some BKFC, all of it going on today. But when we come back next on Fighting Lines, we are going to talk about a retirement of one of the greats that we have seen of this generation, and maybe a guy who ranks in one of the best to ever do it. Talk about that in the next segment. But make sure you follow us on all social medias. Follow us at Fighting Lines on X, Fighting Lines Pod on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. You can go there throughout the week, get clips of the show. And in this couple weeks that we're going to have off of the main show, maybe I'll throw out some bonus segments here or there on some of those socials and other ways to find us, where I'll give you a reaction maybe to this fight this weekend between Joshua and Jake Paul if it warrants it. We get some other big news that I feel is worthy of commenting on. Maybe we'll throw you out some videos or give you some tweets or some other posts one way or another. So make sure you're following that throughout the couple week break that we're going to take here for Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. And wherever you're taking part in the show, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, subscribe. Make sure to subscribe. That way you get alerted when we are back in action in the beginning of 2026. But comment, let people know we're there, get some more fans, some more viewers, some more people in this community, and involved with Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. All right, as we get into the holiday season, get through some of these big holidays and wrap things up heading to the end of 2025, we're also going to be wrapping up the fighting career at least, of one of the greatest of this generation, one of the pound-for-pound best, the pound-for-pound current king, and maybe one of the best pound-for-pound that we have seen ever in boxing, and that is Terence Bud Crawford. T-Bud has called it a career. He announced this week the 38-year-old from Omaha is going to be hanging up the gloves and starting a new chapter of his life. Retires with a record of 42-0, 31 knockouts. So unblemished, unbeaten, gone through everybody that was in his way, and put a lot of them to the mat in the process. Not a guy who just went and tried to get decisions, not a guy who just outlasted guys and avoided the big shots. He was willing to engage with anyone, was willing to fight anyone, and beat every one of them that got in his way. Coming off, of course, that unanimous decision win over Canelo Alvarez that made him the undisputed super middleweight champion back there in September. Decides to call it quits after that, after becomes the only male boxer to be a unified undisputed champion in 3 different weight divisions. That's right, 3 different divisions. He went up and captured all the belts and then decides that's good enough. That's that piece of history that he wanted. He said on social media in a video that he put out there that he wanted a different kind of battle, and that was getting to walk away on his own terms. And that's something that many athletes don't get to do. Not just boxers, not just fighters, a lot of athletes in general. You know, they just try to hang on. That's all they've ever known. That's their identity to them. So hanging up is tough to go back to a different life, to where now all of a sudden you're home all the time and with the family 24/7, or where you don't have that drive to go to the gym and lose that weight or do the things that you have been doing for the better part of your life. For at least half your life for a lot of these guys and girls. Since you were a teenager, or some even like young kids. Started in boxing or MMA. That by the time you're in your mid to late 30s, early 40s, that's all you've known forever. So to now hang that up, it's tough. Same thing with other athletes in other sports. We've seen a lot of guys hang on too long, but especially fighters. You think of Fedor Emelianenko, how he was unbeatable, how he was in many people's minds the greatest MMA fighter ever, and then went down the other side of the hill after he lost a couple fights and just couldn't get it back. You think of Anderson Silva. He lost that freak injury to Chris Weidman where the leg broke, but after that wasn't the same. Lost a bunch of fights to guys who wouldn't have stood a chance with him. I mean, he's still doing it, still boxing. He's going to be fighting on this card this weekend. We'll talk about that. But, as far as his MMA career, it changed drastically for a lot of people with the way things went towards the end. I mean, you've had plenty of boxers that have had their career be changed drastically by, just continuing to fight and not giving it up. I mean, even guys that haven't lost. I mean, Floyd Mayweather's still doing some of these fights that he does, these exhibition fights that people are just, kind of sticking their nose up at, or, a situation like Mike Tyson, who many people consider one of the greatest ever, and continues to fight on, was just fighting Jake Paul in that ridiculous Netflix fight. It's happened time and time again where fighters just can't hang it up. That's who they are. That's how people know them, and they can't get out of the ring. Well, T-Bud is trying to do that now at 38 years old, deciding that is the end for him. And of those 42 wins, those 42 fights that he had, the last 20 fights he has fought have all involved the title on the line. That's right. He's moved up from weight class to weight class, fought in 5 different weight classes. In fact, has 18 titles between 5 weight classes. Lightweight, junior welterweight, where he became unified undisputed champion. Welterweight, where he did the same thing. Junior middleweight, and now super middleweight, where again, ends his career as a unified undisputed champion. For the last 20 fights, even when he was moving up weight classes, putting on extra weight, fighting bigger guys, never took a warm-up fight, never took some tomato can to make sure he could hang at that kind of weight class. He went for a title every time. And that just shows you how much of a badass he was, that he wasn't afraid of anybody. He said he spent his whole life chasing the feeling of proving people wrong. Wasn't chasing the belts, even though he had a lot of them. Wasn't chasing the money, made plenty of that. Wasn't chasing the headlines. He said that his whole life was about proving people wrong, about who he could be coming out of Omaha, Nebraska. And now it's time to chase something else. We've seen a lot on his social media posts lately of him going around the world, probably locking up some business deals, probably locking up the next part of his life. I'm sure some of the things that he has been working on played into this decision being final, but he claims that he is done now with boxing as far as being a fighter inside that ring. And if he is, congratulations to him. A hell of a career. He's one of the pound for pound best right now, this generation. There's no way you can't talk about him as one of the pound for pound best ever. There are people who are going to have their favorites in certain eras. Maybe the people that he fought aren't the same level as, if you're going to talk about back in the day, we had, Sugar Ray Leonard and Hagler and Hearns and all those guys in the same division battling it out. Maybe some people might think that didn't have that kind of competition. Maybe some people don't put him up there with Floyd because Floyd had more wins. Although a lot more knockout wins for T-Bud Crawford, and never dodged the guy in front of him and never waited till he was out of his prime, people would argue as well. So he's going to be a guy that has an argument as one of the best ever, not just of this era, but of boxing history. And you can't put any shame to that. The guy always rose to the challenge. You look at the list of fighters he fought, guys like Kell Brook, Amir Khan, Jose Benavidez Jr., Jeff Horn, John Molina Jr., Yorikis Gamboa, Sean Porter, Errol Spence Jr., Canelo Alvarez. Those are some heavy hitters, especially as you get further and further down that list. And a lot of those, Errol Spence Jr., Canelo Alvarez, Porter, those were guys later in his career too, moving up in divisions, go fighting bigger guys later in his career, wasn't afraid, always stood up to the challenge, and always came up on top. That is the career of Terence T-Bud Crawford. Sorry to see him go, but excited to see what is next for him in his next chapter of life. What is the next part of his journey that he goes through? But for what he gave us over these years, these many years in boxing that he has been rolling through here in the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, thank you for putting on the show that you did, T-Bud, and congratulations on an incredible career. All right, before we go back and recap some of the things we saw last weekend in combat sports, let's talk about the fight card we have going on tonight. Now, I'm not going to put it up there as one of the best ever, one of the best of the year. It's kind of a circus fight at the top of it, but there's a lot of good fights throughout the card otherwise. So you got to give it its respect for what it's doing. And it's going to be for not free. You got to have Netflix, but it's not a pay-per-view card. It's not a bunch of money you got to shell out to watch it. If you have Netflix, which many people do, you get to watch this fight if you want to. And it's going to be Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua, heavyweight battle in boxing. Now, of course, Paul, the 28-year-old American social media star, former Disney kid, has transitioned into his boxing career, where he is 12-1 in his career with 7 KOs, coming off a unanimous decision win over Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in June. Was supposed to fight Tank Davis in a complete farce of a fight. Thankfully, that got canceled when more allegations and more drama came out about Tank Davis' life outside of the ring and the things that he has done and activities he has had with bad treatment of women. So I'm glad they canceled that. And instead of just throwing in some other guy to try to get an easy win off of and just make his name off of somebody who has a pedigree in combat sports but isn't up to his size or his standard or anything like that, like he's done with so many times, fighting MMA guys that were grapplers or fighting guys who were, 15, 20, 30 pounds lighter than him when they really were in their prime. Instead, he takes on the challenge of fighting Anthony Joshua, the 36-year-old Brit and former heavyweight champion of the world, 28-4 for his boxing record, 25 KOs in that 28 wins, coming off a loss to Daniel Dubois by 5th round KO back in September of last year. But this is a guy who's got a lot of power. This is a guy who's very dangerous. And I'm not going to say getting better as far as, he's not in his prime, but he's getting better maybe skill-wise. We see him training with Team Usyk. And, you see the open workouts they had where the movement, the head movement, the body movement, the things, it's a lot different than we've ever seen from him. So could he be the best he's ever been mentally as a fighter with some of that power still left at 36? Absolutely. And that's probably why people think he's going to steamroll Jake Paul. Joshua's going to have a 5-inch height, 6-inch reach advantage, and will weigh 27 pounds more than Jake Paul, or at least weighed in at 27 pounds more. Who knows? I don't know if there's a rehydration clause in there where he can't get any bigger than that come fight night, but the guy looked ripped, looked huge, looked fast, looked to be better than we've seen him in years, going against Jake Paul, who has some power. We'll give him that. He can punch. He can move. But does he have the defense and does he have the skill-wise to deal with an actual real boxer in his prime who has the power that Anthony Joshua has? I don't think so. Most people don't. I mean, even Anthony Joshua said, basically, if I don't kill this guy in the first round, I did a bad job. That being said, when you're looking at the odds, obviously Joshua, a huge favorite, minus 1,300. Jake Paul is plus 700. If you want to try to sprinkle it, take a chance, go ahead. I'm not getting anywhere near that. What's the better way to play it? Well, Joshua by KO, TKO, minus 390. Still just ugly odds, not something you want to put up there and spend, almost $400 to make 100 back. That's just ridiculous. So you look for total rounds, you look for when it can end, things like that. Usually I like those, round props where they kind of group them together. It's only an 8-round fight, so the odds are going to be compressed a little bit. Joshua to win in 1 through 4 is minus 200. Joshua to win in 5 through 8 is plus 650. Do I think it gets to round 5 to give me plus money? No. I think it ends in those first 4 rounds. But minus 200, still a little bit too much juice for me to get involved with. So the total round set at 2.5. The over 2.5 is minus 156. Under 2.5, plus 116. So you can get plus money if he just steamrolls him right away. A lot of people are going to like that. A lot of people are going to jump on that. I'm sure by the time it rolls around to fight night, if we get to the time the fight starts, that might be minus money. I'm going to take a chance and go the over 2.5 at minus 156. I know all the talk is that he has to destroy him right away. I know everyone's saying that. I don't think he's going to get in there and just try to roll through this guy right away. I think he's going to play with him a little bit. I think he's going to play with his food. Do I think he gets to round 5? Hell no. Do I think we maybe get into the 3rd round? He can get into that second half of the 3rd round, maybe the 4th round? It's a possibility. I'm going to take a chance at minus 156. I mean, in my heart, and what I want to happen, yeah, under 2.5. I want him to steamroll him and just make a complete sham out of this because that's what this fight is. But I don't feel like that's going to happen. Netflix is going to want to get their money. Anthony Joshua's being paid handsomely. I don't think he's going to fear this guy to think, all right, I got to dispatch him before he hurts me. I think he's going to mess around a little bit. I think he's going to showboat a little bit. try to get back in people's minds as being this badass that he was and can hopefully get back to being. I think he's going to play a little bit, and I'm going to take the over 2.5 rounds at minus 156. I know that when it hit with Francis Ngannou, but Francis Ngannou is dangerous. That's not a guy you mess with. Jake Paul, I don't think he's afraid of. I think he does mess with him. Let's go the over 2.5. Now, good job by them to hold over most of the fights they had on that original card with Tank Davis. A lot of fights where they're bringing up women champions and promoting their fights and being part of this. There's only one major change. I mean, there's a couple others probably here or there that I didn't pick up on, but the one major change, of course, is in a fight between Anderson Silva, who I mentioned previously on the show, was supposed to fight Chris Weidman, the guy who, of course, broke his leg and they beat him again in the rematch. Doesn't fight him. Weidman gets hurt. He pulls out. So now it is Anderson Silva versus Tyron Woodley in a 6-round fight at 195. Both guys' last pro boxing fight was against Jake Paul. Now, Woodley lost to him by KO for the second time in December of 2021. Hasn't fought since. Silva lost to him by unanimous decision in October of 2022. He's fought a few exhibition fights since then, but his last pro fight was against Jake Paul. Silva is 50. Woodley's 43. Silva was always a better striker. Woodley was a wrestler, grappler, get you to the mat, grind you down. He could throw a couple punches to set that up, but was never the brawler. That's why when Jake Paul fought him not once but twice, it was a complete joke. And was also a much lighter fighter at 170. This is at 195. Anderson Silva always fought at 180, has fought at 205, parts of his career too. This isn't going to be a problem. He's going to be bigger. He's going to be longer. He's going to be faster. Even though he's 7 years older, Anderson Silva wins this fight, probably cruises to a decision, although I couldn't even find odds on this one, so people aren't even excited about it as far as betting it. But I think Anderson Silva is going to win it. Now, a great fight as the co-main event for this one is a unified super featherweight battle in the women's side of boxing with Alicia Baumgartner going against Layla Beaudoin. Beaudoin, the 29-year-old from Canada, 13-1, 2 KOs in her record for her career. Baumgartner, 31-year-old from U.S., is 16-1, 7 KOs. One of the biggest stars in female boxing right now. She's a title holder since 2021. Baumgartner has wins over Eva Matisse and Michaela Mayer, two of the other big names in women's boxing. She's been an undisputed super featherweight champ since 2023. So putting all those titles on the line here, big favorite, minus 1,600. A lot of the fights on this card have big favorites, so not the easiest betting them on money line unless you can get some of these other odds that probably aren't up right now as far as taping is gone. Might come up day of the fight right before, but Baumgartner minus 1,600 on the money line. Ugly. Don't want anything to do with it, even though she's going to steamroll her. But her by points is minus 270. She's known as the bomb, but hasn't gotten a finish in her last 6 fights. So even though it's an ugly number, minus 270 is the best you're going to get in this one as far as Baumgartner, if you want to bet that one. Then also on the card, as I said, is a number of other women's fights for titles. You have an undisputed bantamweight fight between Jarinka Johnson, the 30-year-old from New Zealand, who is the WBO, WBA, WBC, and IBF title holder in that division, 18-2, 3 wins in a row and back-to-back TKOs, going against Amanda Gall from Canada, the 36-year-old who is 12-0-1, 11 decisions, 6 wins in a row for her. So that's going to be an interesting fight between those two. Probably a little bit more power with the champion from New Zealand right now. You also have a WBC lightweight title fight between Caroline Dubois, the 24-year-old from Britain, who's 11-0-1 with 5 KOs and is the WBC champ. This is her first pro fight out of the UK, though. Who knows how that affects her, especially going down to Miami, where you get much different weather than over there in the UK. Going against Camila Panada, the 34-year-old from Italy, who was 8-2-1 in her career with 1 KO, also making her U.S. debut. Most of her fights were in Italy, had some other ones throughout Europe, but mostly over there in the boot. Now is coming down to Miami as well for that title fight. You also have a WBC strawweight title match between Constavale, the 33-year-old who was born in Nicaragua, raised in Costa Rica, 33-3 for her career. Lots of fights under her belt, 10 KO victories. She is a WBC champ, has 6 world titles in 3 divisions, and she's going to defend that belt against Yadira Bustillos, the 25-year-old from Vegas, 11-1 in her career here, 4 straight wins, and 2 of her last 3 are by KO TKO. So that could be an interesting mix with the longtime veteran coming out there of Central America, trying to hold on to that title against the U.S. fighter who's got some power in those fists in the last couple fights. Although some great fights for the women there on that card. As much as, I give Jake Paul crap for some of the fights that he has picked, I got to give him a lot of credit with the way he has continued to prop up women's boxing to try to make a big show of it to try to give it the love it deserves. These ladies are warriors. I'm looking forward to watching some of those fights way more than watching Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua. So credit to MVP and Jake Paul for continuing to promote women's boxing and loading the card with it. Should be some great title fights. And then a steamrolling at heavyweight. Well, last weekend we closed out the ESPN TV deal and 2025 with the UFC as they had their final fight of the year, final fight involving ESPN, and that was Fight Night at the Apex, UFC Vegas 112, UFC Fight Night, Royval versus Kape. Now, we're going to escape the Apex a little bit next year, according to the schedule, early on for the first quarter, but not completely. We're still going to get some fight nights there, so it is what it is. But I'm not sad to see some of those events go. You know, the low crowds, just tiny little venue. I know they're expanding it. They're going to have more people still. These cards aren't great. The action is, though. We saw some good fights here on this card, including that main event, which was big for the flyweight division, of course, with Pantoja losing the title due to his injury against Van. That opens the door for some of these other guys that maybe might not have gotten another shot against Pantoja, who fought against him before. You know, could a guy like Royval get back in the picture, even though he'd already lost to Van previously, to put an exclamation point on his resume and see if he can get a shot at that title against Van? Or would Kape try to leapfrog him and maybe even leapfrog Tatsuro Taira, who people have talked about getting a shot at that belt with a win over this perennial contender? Well, in the end, it is Kape who puts another stamp on his career record here as he gets the win over the perennial contender Royval. Kape was a big favorite at minus 310. I was rolling with Royval. I figured that, you know, a guy like that, as good as he was through many years, was only getting beaten by the best, to guys like Pantoja, Moreno, who were champions, that he could pull one out maybe against the upstart trying to take his place in the rankings. I had him winning plus 215 because I got great odds on that. I also said that, you know, by submission was a good play to throw out there because he has a lot of ground game and had many submissions throughout his career. Don't get either of those as Kape wins by first round KO TKO 3 minutes and 18 seconds into the fight to put himself firmly in that title picture mix. Both guys are measured early on in the fight with Kape holding the middle, while Royval was just kind of circling on the outside, throwing leg kicks, trying to slow down his opponent and be able to get him down to the mat at some point. But then all of a sudden, Kape starts trying to catch some of Royval's kicks, starting 2 minutes in. With 150 left in the round, Kape starts moving a little bit more aggressively, going after Royval a little bit more with some feints, trying to get the timing right to nail him with some shots and throw Royval off, and then lands a right hook that drops Royval. Royval tries to get back up, but Kape jumps right on him, lands a few more good shots, one that puts Royval out cold. Herm Dean jumps in. Royval was upset about the stoppage. He thought that he should have been allowed to continue more, try to fight off, try to get back into the fight, but he was knocked out and then woken up by more punches. It wasn't a situation where he was still there, still conscious, still fighting. He was out cold and then woken up by getting hit in the face again. And you can even see it because then when he gets up, he's on wobbly legs. He's not getting up fine, walking around with all his facilities. The guy was still wobbling even after the fight was stopped. Herb Dean was right to jump in there and stop it. Nice win by Manel Kape, who now ties Joey Benavidez with the most knockouts in the flyweight division. Also ties the longest active knockout streak for 3 in a row with Topuria, Morales, and some other guys. So putting his name up there as one of the best in this division right now, and definitely a title contender. He got himself a performance bonus for his great shots there to end Royval. And he tells Van that Van's in his spot, that he should have been there, but he got injured. And that's why Van got the chance, and that he's Van's daddy, and he's going to take his belt. So he wants to do it in Houston, February 21st. We already have a headliner on that card, so I don't think they're going to do it there. Of course, Van wanted to fight there too because he's from there, but we'll see if they can make that happen. Maybe they change up the lineup. Who knows? But Kape trying to stamp his name there as the next one who should get a shot against Van. Of course, if Pantoja can't go right away. It's a great win by him. You know, I still put Taira over him as the next contender. He was already ranked over him. He got a big win over a former champion in Moreno, who was number 2 in the division. Kape was below Taira, beats the guy who's number 3 in Royval. So they both had great wins. Both were impressive. I still think Taira is the better one to put up against Van if Pantoja can't go. But just because he is, doesn't mean the UFC will do that. Just because he was ranked higher, doesn't mean the UFC will follow that either. So we'll see what they decide is next. For Joshua Van, of course, still waiting, I'm sure, on Pantoja, on diagnosis after that injury to see how long he may have to sit out or if he gets an immediate rematch. You also had a big battle at featherweight with number 15, Giga Chikadze versus Kevin Vallejos. Vallejos, a 24-year-old, 2-0 in the UFC coming into this fight. 11 wins in his career by KO, TKO, so a big striker going against Chikadze, who was 8-3 in the UFC and was kind of a bit on an up-and-down losing streak here lately. So was trying to get back into the picture here at number 15, trying to get back into that top 10 with a win and recapturing things, but he doesn't. Vallejos was a big favorite at minus 320. I thought that he would win the fight, but what I really liked, what I really put the money on was the under 2.5 rounds at plus 120. We got plus money on it, and both these guys love KO, TKO victories. So in a 3-round fight, how do you not take that chance? We did, even though Chikadze had never been KO'd. He is now, as Vallejos gets the second round KO, TKO, 1 minute and 29 seconds into the round. It's very slow and measured to start. Both these guys only throwing, a few things here and there, trying to feel their opponent out. About halfway through the first round, Gidget throws a good kick on the leg, followed by one to the body and a few punches. But after they're trying a flying knee against Vallejos, he gets in the clinch against the cage. Gidget starts bleeding from his leg. It was very weird because, we find out later on in the replays, there was a kick that was checked by Vallejos that somehow just made Chikadze bleed from lower on the shin, and it was bleeding pretty good. And they did a good job on it in between rounds, but then in the second round, it starts bleeding right away again. So you wonder if that was going to be something that was an issue for him later on. Well, we don't even get to figure that out because I gave the first round to Chikadze, but seemed off. Something was wrong because he starts going the wrong corner in the break. Vallejos and the ref got to grab him and say, whoa, dude, you're this way. So they go back into their corners, get ready. They start round two. And about 1 minute and 20 into that round, Vallejos backs Chikadze up against the cage with an overhand right, starts chasing him. And as Chikadze tries to escape going outside the cage, gets nailed with a spinning left back fist that drops him right away. Vallejos jumps right on him, lands some big elbows on the side of his head before the ref jumps in there to stop the fight. Chikadze is unsteady as he tries to get back up. Maybe another situation where the guy wasn't loving the stoppage, but, he got rocked. He got dropped, and he wasn't even steady when he got back up, so no argument there. Again, good stoppage. Vallejos is now on a 6-fight win streak, winning all 3 of his fights in the UFC, and he got a performance of the night bonus as well with that sweet spinning back fist. The win actually bumps him up to number 13 in the division now. He goes from unranked to number 13. He had some call-outs afterwards. He called out Cub Swanson, which was weird. I guess Cub Swanson was in the corner of Giga Chikadze, so, talked about him, or he said he's, like a striker, a boxer, to set his sights on and try to fight that guy. But Cub Swanson's not even in the rankings. Cub Swanson, why are you calling him out? You're in the rankings now. Go after somebody in that top 10. I think a fight for him maybe to look for and try to get maybe a guy like Josh Emmett or Gene Silva or Brian Ortega, guys who are kind of on the bottom of that top 10 that could be great striking partners and could raise his profile if he gets that 4th win in the UFC. I think those are better options, better guys he should set his sights on instead of looking across the cage and seeing Cub Swanson. I know the guy fought forever and is a legend in the sport, but focus on guys who are there now, who can help you raise your profile and help you get up into these rankings and make yourself a title contender. Great performance by him, though, in that fight. There was also a battle that we were focusing on, the women's strawweight between Amanda Lemos and Jillian Robertson. We liked Robertson, had her by points. Don't even get to see that. The fight gets pulled a couple hours beforehand. Apparently, Lemos suffered some kind of medical issue just 3 hours before the fight is set to go off. They both weighed in. They're both ready to go. But something happens to Lemos. Fight's called off. We don't see that one. We'll see what's next for Jillian Robertson if they get her back in there quick. Fight that we did see, didn't bet on, but we're looking forward to, and that was welterweight battle between Neil Magny and Yaroslav Amosov. As we said, Magny, longtime UFC fighter, just coming off the win there over in Australia against Jake Matthews, where he escapes the submission, even though the ref stopped it, then gets the submission later on. Win was upheld despite being contested by Matthews, going against Amosov, the former Bellator champion in this division, the 32-year-old from Ukraine, a guy who was fighting in the war against Russia over these years to the point where there's pictures of him with his unit where they went back to, his house to dig out his belt after it had been bombed and collapsed. And they found the belt. He brought it back, came back to fight again in Bellator a couple years later, where he lost for the first time. That's his only loss of his career. Then came back earlier this year in a lesser promotion to fight again and tune himself up. Now coming in here against the UFC stalwart Neil Magny, getting that shot at the UFC. I thought Amosov would win, but, I didn't know what he'd be like after a couple of years of training, not training, fighting in a war, not fighting in the cage, then fighting in the cage, what were his skill set and his gas tank and all these other things going to look like coming into this fight against a longtime veteran and not easy welcomer in Magny to the UFC? Well, he looked great. He kicked his butt, and it kind of choked 3 minutes and 14 seconds into the first round. Both guys were throwing some good shots early on, looking to engage right away. This wasn't a feeling out process. Both guys were trying to put their stamp on this fight and trying to start to control things right from the beginning. Magny fought out of a takedown attempt 1 minute in, but then 45 seconds later, Amosov gets him to the mat, falls on him into the half guard. At one point, Amosov stretches out of the half guard, stretches his leg so far out because he traps Magny's arm underneath his knee, then is able to escape the rest, throw on the anaconda choke and switch his position. Didn't have it locked in fully at first, but was patient and let go a little bit with his hold at one point to get his leg over Magny's arm and trap that in a different position, and then lock the choke even more in, and then Magny eventually taps 3 minutes and 14 seconds into the fight. I mean, he looked great, Amosov. He dominated the fight, dominated a guy who was making his 37th UFC appearance. This isn't some rookie. This isn't some guy who's like 4 fights in and has lost 3 of them. Neil Magny has a long tenured career with the UFC, has a lot of wins, and he just ran right through him. You know what he wants to do. He loves those chokes. Still could not be stopped. He's now 29-1 in his MMA career. 21 of those 29 wins are by finish. So he's not looking to go to the judges and get points. He says thank you to the UFC, thank you to American Top Team for getting him ready. Talks about how happy he is to be here and be in the UFC, but also said, when asked about his goal, well, it's the belt. That's what everybody fights for. That's what we want. So he's got his eyes set on the top, and we'll see where he goes from here. Who's next for him? Who does the UFC throw at him? I mean, when you give him Neil Magny, you can't really go and throw some tomato can otherwise. You got to give him some top opponents to see if he can climb that ladder and do it quickly. Go right into that top 15. You know, maybe give him a guy like Joaquin Buckley or Leon Edwards, who are right at the bottom of that top 10. Those could be some interesting fights for him. Former champion Edwards, Buckley, a tough opponent who's had some top fights as well. So I would suggest those guys as maybe his next opponents, but we'll see what the UFC does next with Amosov and how quickly he gets back into that cage. Then we also have to mention the fight of the night between 2 heavyweights, Stephen Asplund and Sean Sharaf, where Asplund gets the second round KO TKO, 3 minutes and 49 seconds into that round. It was an old school, out of shape, not ripped heavyweight battle between 2 guys just throwing big fists with their bellies, you know, bouncing around. Now, Asplund, I mean, the guy weighed in at just under 260 for this event. He weighed 520 pounds at one point, lost 260 pounds over these years to even get to where he is at this point in the UFC. So we'll see if he can continue that journey, continue to lose some weight and get himself in better shape and be, you know, maybe even more of a force in this division. But, you know, both guys were throwing big hands from the start. Both guys were dropping the other, not giving an inch, just trying to fight their way through this fight. And Asplund's coming forward for most of the first round, putting Sharaf on the back foot, putting him against the cage. But then Sharaf landed some good shots in the second that seemed like he was going to take some control early on in that round before Asplund turns it back around on him. So he's coming back forward again. And eventually, in the end of that second round, getting the KO TKO victory, just pummeling his opponent time and time again. So a nice win by him here to get fight of the night honors between these 2 guys battling in heavyweight. He also had a nice win at featherweight by Malquazel Costa against Morgan Shari. It was a first round KO TKO, 1 minute 14 seconds into the round. Costa was staying right in front of Bruce Buffer and yelling his name and nickname as Buffer yelled at the same time. It was an interesting scene before the fight, but then getting right into the mix as the fight starts, throwing some big leg kicks early on and chasing his opponent, then lands a left head kick to the jaw of Sharir as he's falling himself, and gets up and tries to jump in there and start landing on his opponent who's down. But the ref jumps in there right away, knowing that Sharir is out for the count and not going to get up. He protects him. He stops it. He doesn't even try to, you know, get back up and fight because he knew that he was done. That is the first loss of Sharir's career by KO TKO. So that was a hell of a kick by Costa, who now wins his 5th fight in a row and 6 of his last 7. We'll see what's next for him as he starts to try to climb into these rankings and into the title picture in this division at featherweight. All right, we also had fights earlier in the day last weekend over there in France, PFL Champions Series in Lyon. It was also the PFL Europe Finals for 2025 over there on ESPN Unlimited, and started early. The main card started late morning, 11 a.m. Eastern with the time difference. And then by the time you got into the early afternoon, you got some title fights you can watch at the top. Those ones we're going to focus on, including the heavyweight title as the main event. Renan Ferreira against Vadim Nemkov for the PFL heavyweight title. Of course, Ferreira, the 36-year-old from Brazil, was the former PFL heavyweight champion. And coming off that loss to Ngannou last October on that Battle of the Giants pay-per-view card. Nemkov, the 33-year-old Russian, was the former light heavyweight champion in Bellator. 13-0 with one no contest in the last 9+ years coming into this fight, and coming off a rear naked choke win over Tim Johnson in January. The Fedor Emelianenko protege, moving up to heavyweight for the first time in that Johnson fight, now looking to hold the title for that organization. We thought that Nemkov was going to get the win. Minus 500, big favorite on the money line. I like Nemkov by submission at plus 135, and that is what we get. We hit that one with the plus money as Nemkov gets the first round submission by arm triangle 4 minutes into the fight. I mean, 30 seconds in, Nemkov landed a little left hook on the way into a takedown. Right away, took control of things. He right away took Ferreira down, had him up against the cage, so it was harder for him to escape as well. Got some shots from the top on him, gets the mount on top of Ferreira with just under 3 minutes into the fight. And then from there on, is just looking for his spots. Starts trying to get that arm triangle. Starts trying to set it up, tries here or there, doesn't land, doesn't get the right, grip on it, then lands some more shots from the top. Ferreira actually flips the position at one point, gets on top, but then loses again, and Nemkov locks in the arm triangle once he's back on top and gets the submission victory after the tap by Ferreira with 1 minute left in the round. So Nemkov was controlling most of the fight. At one point, Ferreira gets a little change of pace, gets a different position, gets on top, but quickly loses that, and Nemkov gets the victory that he wants by arm triangle choke 4 minutes into the fight. Nemkov is now the heavyweight champion of the PFL. As we've talked about over the last couple weeks, PFL changing things. Only going to be one belt. Tournaments are gone. Those belts don't matter. It's only about who wins the title fights, like most organizations have. So now the first heavyweight champion of the PFL, post all that, post the John Martin CEO installing, is Vadim Nemkov. He says he'll fight whoever the organization wants him to. But for me, and I'm sure for many people, anyone who follows the PFL, there's only one person that he should be fighting next. Because they have some decent heavyweights here or there in the PFL, but they have one name who's under contract for at least one more fight and coming up on the end of that deal. So before he possibly signs somewhere else and leaves, because it's been kind of an up and down situation since they signed him, you have to get Nemkov against Francis Ngannou. There's nobody else in that organization worth Francis Ngannou fighting. And while there are some other guys that maybe Nemkov could fight that might be decent fights because, he is early in his heavyweight career, from what he's shown, there is nobody else worth fighting for him than Francis Ngannou. Now, of course, we'll see what PFL does if they add some more heavyweights, if they start to bolster that roster in other ways and give some other challenges. But right now, as that roster stands, as far as we know, there's only one fight to make for the new PFL heavyweight champ, and that is the guy who won that super fights heavyweight title in Francis Ngannou. We got to put these two guys together for the PFL for that heavyweight title, and we got to do it soon in 2026. Come on. Let's get that going. Also on the card, as the co-main event, was a women's featherweight title between Chris Cyborg and Sarah Collins. Collins, a 35-year-old from Australia, 6-0 in MMA before this fight, 3-0 in Bellator. Cyborg, the 40-year-old from Brazilian, coming towards the end of her career, 28-2 before this fight with 21 wins by KO TKO. I thought that she was going to steamroll her. I thought this was going to be an easy victory for her. The books had her as a huge favorite, minus 650. So when you're looking for a better way to bet it, I thought Cyborg by KO TKO, because that's the way she finishes so many fights. Was even not a great line there at minus 190, but that's the best odds you're going to get against Collins. She wins. She gets a third round win, but it is by submission, rear naked choke, not by KO TKO. Now in round one, Cyborg was stalking right away, going after her opponent, backing Collins up, who was circling around the cage. She actually caught her with a nice little hook 20 seconds in, Collins does. But after that seemed to wake up Cyborg even more. All the big shots after that were by Cyborg, and she kept stalking her opponent, kept blooding her up, chopping her leg down. Eventually, took her to the mat at one point where she kicked the leg so hard that Collins fell to the mat. She got back up, but she's getting bloodied late by the shots by Cyborg, as many of her opponents have in the past. First round to Cyborg. Second round, Cyborg continues to stalk. Now she's mixing in some good kicks as well, trying to chop down Collins in other ways besides just beating her in the face. Eventually, Collins gets a takedown about halfway through the round, and She does some good stuff on the ground, doesn't really land too much, doesn't really get the submission attempts, but has some good control of Cyborg. But she eventually gets up from the mat and starts landing again on Collins, even was landing some shots from her back. So probably still for Cyborg, even though Collins got the takedown and some control on the mat. Round 3, Cyborg's landing well again on the feet, continually going after her opponent. Collins gets a trip takedown 90 seconds in, but that is her undoing, because they even talked about in the broadcast. It is one of those judo takedowns where she throws her and then she's kind of sitting on the side, but isn't able to keep that position. She does for a little while, but the veteran, the longtime practitioner of MMA and BJJ that Cyborg is, eventually slips out the back of that position. As Collins tries to hold her, tries to take her back, she doesn't get it. Cyborg slips out the back and ends up on the back of Collins, and then eventually gets the arm across the face. Can't get it under the chin, but it doesn't matter. She doesn't need the rear naked choke where she's actually choking her out. She just gets her across the face, gets the face crank, and that makes Collins tap. It never really got on the neck, as I said, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes, especially when you're that strong as Cyborg is, you can do enough damage just hurting somebody's jaw, just ripping that thing across their face as tight as you can. So another win for Cyborg. Only the second submission win of her career. So that's obviously why we did not try to bet that one. 29-2 now. 9th straight victory. 16 wins in a row if you include the boxing fight she has had mixed in there during her MMA career as well. So continues to be on a tear. As we said, the only 2 women who would beat her was the first ever pro fight she had, and Amanda Nunes one time in the UFC. Other than that, no one has been able to beat this absolute legend of the sport. She says her next MMA fight will be her last. So unfortunately, this chapter is going to be coming to a close soon for those of us who have enjoyed watching her fight career. She said she wants to fight Leah McCourt. I don't love that one. McCourt lost her last fight to Sarah Collins last September and is 2-3 in her last 5 fights. So that doesn't make much sense to me. Now, obviously, there aren't as many big names in this division in the PFL or even in women's MMA in general. That's why the UFC has kind of, stamped down the upper divisions of the women's fight game for them, because there hasn't been the same depth. But another name that'd be interesting is Cyborg brought up trying to lose some weight and meeting with Dakota Ditcheva in the middle. Ditcheva, of course, 125-pound fighter, Cyborg 145. She says, I could try to drop 10 pounds and I could fight Dakota in the middle and meet at 135. Now, to me, that would be interesting. Now, Ditcheva has a fight coming up in February in Dubai against Denise Kielholtz, and her coming up would be an incredible battle of strikers and kind of a passing of the torch, possibly, if she can get that win, beating an absolute legend. I'm sure she would love that challenge. I don't know if the PFL would love that, though, because you take this woman who has become the face of the PFL. She is one of the most recognizable names and faces for their whole organization. She's one of the ones people know. There's been talks about, the UFC trying to trade for her, trying to trade some contracts in order to get her over to there. That's how good she is. So would you put that at risk and put her against Cyborg and have her get her face pummeled in, possibly? I don't know if you want to try to do that. She's on an incredible run. She's an awesome fighter. But the risk to reward ratio of reward, she beats a legend, becomes even better in her career. Risk of the hype train comes to a crash because she can't beat Cyborg. I don't know if it's worth it. It would be an awesome fight to see. I would love it. I don't know if the PFL takes that kind of risk. Also on this card, you had a great battle at welterweight with Patrick Habirora, the Belgian bomber, gets the first round KO of Kevin Jousset. Habirora was striking from the outside to start the fight, kind of looking a little bit like Adesanya with the stance that he was using and the strikes he was doing and the quickness he was throwing with. And then all of a sudden, Habirora dropped Jousset about halfway through the round with a hard, short left hook. And Habirora jumps right on him, starts pummeling him with short shots. He's covering up, trying to protect himself. And then Habirora stands himself up and then throws a big bomb with the right hand that gets through the guard of Jousset, knocks him unconscious. Ref jumps right in there and ends the fight at that point. Impressive performance by Habirora. There's some great striking, some great speed, some precision, and some just awesome striking by him as he gets the victory. It got crazy in there. I mean, even though Jousset is a French fighter and Habirora is from Belgium, the fans were completely rooting for Habirora there. You even had someone pull a flare out in celebration in the middle of the crowd. They were showing that on the broadcast. I don't know how you let that in an enclosed building, but hey, it happened. So they had that going on. The fans were excited that Habirora got the win. He is now 8-0 in MMA, 7 of his wins by KO, TKO. He said he wants to go to Dubai. because, of course, they have a fight coming up there in that lightweight division. He is normally a lightweight. He was fighting here at welterweight, and he said he can do 155 or can do 170. He'll fight at either division, but he wants to go BK's side for Nurmagomedov, Alfie Davis fighting for that lightweight title for the PFL, and let them know that he's coming for that belt. So we'll see if the PFL brings him there and gives him that shine and maybe puts him in that position to fight the winner of that title fight. We'll see. Maybe they like him at 170, because that could be an interesting situation if you keep a Davis or a Nurmagomedov, with that belt and fighting somebody else, and you can have a Hobby Rora moving up the ranks at welterweight. They're comparing on the broadcast to Thad Jean, the silverback, who made a huge name for himself in the tournament this year for the PFL. If you can get him over to the U.S. in some of those fights, or to Dubai, fighting on some of those bigger cards, making his name in this welterweight division, that could be interesting. Or you could drop him back down to 155 and let him fight one of those guys. Either way, Belgian Bomber is coming, and somebody better watch out. As I said before, you also had the finals for the European tournaments for the PFL that they ran this year in 2025. One of those was for the bantamweight European title, and that was between Boris Adugazel versus Dean Garnett. Adugazel, the French fighter, gets the first round stoppage, 44 seconds in, to win that title, to win that six-figure check. A little bit of controversy, though, as he landed a good left shot to the body and then a couple shots to the head, and then he knocks Garnett down, drops him. He was to the mat. Garnett was definitely hurt, but Garnett reaches out and grabs for the legs of his opponent, gets it. He's trying to get the takedown as his opponent escapes, but the ref has already jumped in there and stopped the fight. Garnett couldn't believe it. You could hear it over and over on the broadcast. They're picking him up on the mic, just berating the ref. Like, how could you do that? You got to be kidding me. He was not happy. He thought it was an early stoppage, and, maybe it could have been. A lot of people thought it was an early stoppage, although if you're looking at the replays, the shots that Garnett takes and the way his legs kind of buckle from underneath him, the way he folds down before he reaches for that leg, I got to give ref credit. It's hard. You're making split-second decisions to try to protect a guy. He may think that he's still in the fight. The way he falls, it was awkward. It was weird. You might have thought that he was completely out. So it's easy to second-guess after the fact and say, how do you stop that fight? It's hard to be in there and taking control of things as they happen. So I'm going to give the ref a little discretion here. I'm going to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Even though Garnett wasn't happy, even though he was reaching out for that leg, the guy was wobbled, he was shaking, he was going down. Wasn't the worst stoppage I've ever seen for sure, although a tough way to lose six figures. All right, well, 2025 was a big year for the BKFC. We're going to wrap up our coverage of their year with a little bit of everything here, a little different flavors from preview, review, looking at the fights that have been announced, all in this one segment here. And of course, we're coming off that card over there in the UK, the Fight Night in Derby. We talk about that main event between Conor Cooke against Anthony Holmes for the vacant BKFC UK light heavyweight title. That is won by Conor Cooke as he gets the win after the third round, where the fight is stopped by the ref because of cuts that were seriously affecting Holmes' vision. Cooke is now 6-1 with 4 straight wins. Do they bring him over to the BKFC in the US at some point? I mean, the guy has shown he has power. You saw that in that fight. Both these guys were game. Both these guys were tough. We talked about this going to be a banger of a fight. And it was. But he gets the victory because of battering his opponent just a little bit more, causing those cuts to make them stop it. But now, as I said, 6-1, 4 straight wins. Do you start to bring him over to the US and put him against some of the best here and see if he can hang with them? I know they don't love to always take the guys with the UK belts over here, because then he kind of holds up that division and maybe makes the shine off of them a little bit less if they lose to some of the guys over here. But he's shown he's game to fight anybody and would be a star over here as well. So we'll see what's next in 2026 for Conor Cooke, as he is now the light heavyweight champion in the UK for the BKFC. Now coming up this weekend, we got a headline fight between two bangers as well, with the Fight Night at the Mohegan Sun. Parker Porter versus Anthony Garrett in the heavyweight division, 7 o'clock Eastern on Saturday. The main card starts on the BKFC app. This was supposed to be a different fight originally, but now we get this battle between these two heavyweights. Porter, the 40-year-old from Connecticut, local fighter, going to have a lot of support there, of course, in the casino. Former UFC fighter, guy with a lot of power. 2-0 in the BKFC. Both those at the Mohegan Sun. So both at home in Connecticut, both by first-round TKO. In February over Gormley in 44 seconds, and in June over Kleckler in 1 minute and 8 seconds. So getting some quick finishes so far now, going against another guy who does the same thing. So make sure you are there for the start of this main event do not get up and walk away, go to the bathroom, get some snacks, because it might be done before we get through those first 2 minutes, because Anthony Garrett, the 36-year-old who now lives in Texas, former Bellator fighter, so another former MMA guy, 3-0 in the BKFC. All of his wins are by first round KO, TKO. 16 seconds against Orr last August, 12 seconds against Johnson last November, and 1 minute and 36 seconds over Wilson in June. So neither of these guys has gone past the first round. It's going to be a quick one. It's going to be brutal. Big height and reach advantage for Garrett in this one. So I think it's going to be a quick finish by someone, probably by Anthony Garrett. But don't discount Porter. As we said, he's going to have the hometown fans behind him at the Mohegan Sun, and he has plenty of power in his fist. So this could be one where we see both guys go down one, if not multiple times, before we get through that first round and get a victor. Then the BKFC also came out with a big press conference for Knucklemania VI in Philly, February 7th. They're going to have that card, of course, the annual Knucklemania card they've had for 5 years before, now going on 6. Back-to-back years, they're going to be doing it in Philly. A lot of Philly fighters on this card, which we saw when they brought out the people on the dais. You had guys like Pat Brady, you had Johnny Cannoli and Pat Sullivan, guys who have fought in Philly for them multiple times now. There's going to be a lot of other fighters, though, too. Let's talk about the top 3 fights that they've announced for this card. Not all of them were there. The top 2 were there. We did not see this last one. But starting with the bottom of the 3 is Ben Bonner, Tony Soto 2, a rematch there at lightweight. I love this fight. I'm excited that they're going to put it on because Bonner caught him in the first fight. It was short notice. Soto was supposed to fight, of course, Tenaglia in a rematch. That fell apart when Tenaglia fought MMA and other organizations in Spain, as he had done before, but wasn't the champion when he'd done it before. So the BKFC got pissed at that, kicked him out, pulled his belt. He had Soto and Bonner fight for it. And maybe Soto didn't know Bonner well enough, didn't take him at as tough as he was, maybe took him for granted. And Bonner jumped on him early, got their quick knockdowns. Soto did well throughout the rest of the fight, kind of regained his footing, got himself back in there, but the knockdowns early on were too much, and Ben Bonner gets the victory. So now, obviously, Soto's not going to take him lightly. He knows how tough this guy is. Everybody who's watched the BKFC knows how tough he is, because not just that Soto fight, but we saw him fight, of course, that fight against Tenaglia in Italy, where I thought he should have gotten the victory and got shafted by those judges. Now he's coming in here against Soto, looking to stamp his claim as one of the best in this division and get a shot at the winner of Trout versus Tenaglia, I'm sure. So going to be 2 guys with bad intentions in there, trying to right some wrongs on both their records, and I'm excited for that fight at Knucklemania. Then we also have a fight between Lorenzo, the Juggernaut Hunt, and Soldier of God, Yoel Romero, in a catchweight battle. Now, we just saw Hunt come back and get one of his formerly held titles against Josh Dyer, where he looked to be in trouble, got knocked down, then got back up and dropped Dyer like he did Mike Richmond, although Dyer got 2 knockdowns against the Juggernaut to the one that Richmond had, so he was really, really in trouble, and then ends up dropping Dyer to take that title off him and reclaim his crown. Going against Romero, who's only had 1 fight in the BKFC, but the long-time MMA fighter. We've seen him all over in all the big MMA promotions. Got a slow start in his first fight as he was, getting acclimated to things, but got the big knockout in the second round. A guy who's always dangerous. All he needs is 1 punch to put you out. So there's going to be some fireworks between these guys. There's going to be some big punches, and it's going to be whose chin can hold up more at this point in their career. Now, if this was for the title, I wouldn't like it because, of course, Yoel Romero's had 1 fight, and we've seen this too much where the BKFC gets a guy who's got a big name and just throws him in the mix, which we're going to see in a second. In this case, it's not for the title. It's a catchweight battle, 2 guys with big fists. Now, speaking of the just recently mentioned title fight where we're throwing a guy in too early just because he has a big name and I'm not happy about it, it's going to be at heavyweight, where Big Ben Rothwell will put that heavyweight title up for grabs against Andre the Pitbull Arlovsky. Really? What does Perdomo have to do to get a shot at the belt? Now, I've loved watching the career of the Pitbull. He has been awesome from his time in the UFC as one of the youngest champions to fighting in affliction against Fedor Emelianenko to back to the UFC. Now, when we talked earlier about some of those guys who maybe fought too long and tarnished their legacy, he could be on that list because he has had a lot of losses towards the end of his career in MMA, but he's always tough, always game, going to throw those fists with that fury, and he can knock you out if you do not take him seriously. Going against Ben Rothwell, who has revigorated his career in the BKFC as the champion, just running through guys. It was always tough in MMA, but now that you have to just stand there and trade with him, you can't take him down to neutralize him. You can't smother him to avoid those big ham hooks hitting you in the face. Now he's just dominated people. But now fighting and defending this belt for the first time. He got it last year against Mick Terrell, hasn't fought since. Instead of putting him against Perdomo, we tried to put him against some guy from, in that Australia card that never happened for a super heavyweight title. Then he's still been out since, as Perdomo has continued to fight, has continued to destroy guys in the first round. Perdomo is now 10-0 after his victory in Hollywood, Florida. All by KO TKO. Only one of those getting out of the first round. And still, we can't give this guy a heavyweight title shot. We pass him over for Andrei Arlovski, who's had one fight in the BKFC. Now, he looked decent in that fight. Did he look great? No. And even after that fight, Andrei Arlovski said he wanted at least one more fight before he challenged Ben Rothwell when they brought it up. Now, I know both Rothwell and Arlovski have the UFC names behind them, that history of being huge names in MMA in the heavyweight division. So I know it's going to be bigger names on the marquee, and that helps sales. And I know that they have this history as having fought twice before. So this is the trilogy of it. Although, Arlovski won both those fights. So is one fight in the BKFC going to change it for Big Ben Rothwell and just make it so that all that's gone? I don't know about that. I know all that. And it factors in, of course. But what does Perdomo have to do to get a shot at this title? The guy is 10-0. He has all his wins by KO TKO, and only one of those has even gotten out of the first round. That last one in Hollywood, Florida, was the first time the guy went past 2 minutes in a fight, has just run through everybody you have at heavyweight, and we're passing him over again. Because after we just had Big Ben Rothwell win that title against Mick Terrell before last year, we then put him up against some other guy in Australia for a super heavyweight title fight that never even came to fruition. That card got canceled. So he didn't fight on there. He hasn't fought since. And the whole time while he's been sitting out with that belt, Perdomo has been just running through guy after guy after guy, even beat the former champion Arnold Adams not once but twice. And still, we don't give him a title shot. We skip him over for a guy who's fought one time in the BKFC. Come on. You got an aging guy in Arlovski who's a legend in the sport. Not to discount anything he's done, but is he the one that you maybe want the title with, who has a couple more fights left before he's gone? Or you have a guy in Perdomo who's your homegrown guy, who, even though, of course, he's from Cuba, so his English isn't great, is still loves to talk, loves to be out there, loves to trash people. He's been calling out Ben Rothwell ever since he got that title. You can make a homegrown champion if he beats Big Ben Rothwell. Or you just have Big Ben Rothwell beat him still and hold the title and make a epic battle of that where, they go again in a couple fights and fight again. The option of putting Rothwell against Perdomo is so much better than putting him against the Pitbull. No offense to the Pitbull. I have loved watching his career, but come on, what are we doing? This is not the right fight to make. The only reason I could see for them doing this is this tournament that they're talking about, the baddest man alive. Because even though it's open to anybody in any division, it's obviously going to favor the heavyweights. And the only reason I could see them not putting Perdomo and Big Ben together yet is if they're trying to save that for the finals of that tournament somehow. Otherwise, it makes no sense why a guy who is 10-0 with 10 finishes is not getting a shot at the belt. All right, before we get out of here and close out our final show of 2025, let's look ahead to some of the stuff we're going to see in 2026 that we have talked about, things that have been announced in Fight World, and fights that we might not talk about before we see them at the start of the new year. And that is this card on January 3rd that we have mentioned down in San Juan, Puerto Rico on the zone. We have 2 women's title fights on the line, and they are going to be bangers. Of course, the headliner of this card has the women's featherweight titles on the line when Amanda Serrano goes against Erica Cruz. They're fighting for Serrano's WBO and WBA featherweight titles. Serrano, the 37-year-old from Puerto Rico, 47-4-1 in her career. 3 of those losses are to Katie Taylor. So has beaten just about everybody else they put in front of her. And you know what? 2 of those fights against Taylor were very close, and some people think that Serrano should have gotten the victory. Now she's putting those titles up against Cruz. The 35-year-old from Mexico is 18-2-1 in her career, 14 wins by decision. So a lot more power in the hands of Serrano going against Cruz, who's going to try to survive and get the decision, get the points from the judges. We'll see if she can do that. There's actually a rematch because Serrano beat her by unanimous decision back in February of 2023. Cruz is 3-0-1 since then, but Serrano's still on a different level. Beat her once. I think she's going to beat her again. She's even a minus 2,000 favorite. Most books don't even have it up yet. Not just because it's a little bit early for it, but because she's so much of a favorite in this fight. So not going to be one to bet, but definitely check it out and watch it and see what Serrano does because she's one of the best in women's boxing without a doubt. Also on this card is going to be a lightweight title fight between Stephanie Hahn and Holly Holm for Hahn's WBA women's lightweight title. Hahn, the 35-year-old from Texas, is unbeaten 11-0 with 8 decision victories. Also works as a police officer when she's not in there throwing the fist. So thank you to her for her service. And good for her putting up her titles against a legend in Holly Holm, the 44-year-old from New Mexico, one of the best women's boxers of all time. She's going to be in the Hall of Fame in the history books for sure. Multiple division champion boxing, 18 titles across 3 divisions, 34-2 for her career in boxing, 25 decision victories. Then, of course, she moved to MMA and the UFC, where she went 15-7 for her career, won the bantamweight title, and one of the biggest upsets in the history of women's MMA when she beat Ronda Rousey, but never recaptured that magic, never recaptured that gold because she went 5-7 after that. But the preacher's daughter has been part of combat sports for a long time now and returned to boxing earlier this year where she got a win. Now going for a title, trying to recapture that gold in the sport that she originally fell in love with. She is the favorite at minus 235. She is my pick to win this fight. If the odds come out, look for her by decision. I think this fight goes a distance either way. So we'll see what that ends up being. But right now, she is a favorite at minus 235 to take that title. Before we get out of here, we'll also talk about some announcements we got in the PFL for fights. Of course, we know their next big event isn't until February 7th in Dubai, where we have that stacked card where you have Nurmagomedov versus Davis, like we talked about earlier, for the lightweight title. You have Kurmagomedov versus Musayev for the welterweight title. So 2 titles on the line. You also have the return of Dakota Ditcheva in a non-title fight. You have Molotov and Pinedo also fighting in their weight classes in big fights. So it is a stacked card for their return, February 7th. Looking forward to that. But we also got some announcements for a card later in the year, March 20th, when they have their first ever fight card in Madrid, Spain. It's going to be headlined by the middleweight title fight where Castelo Vanstinas puts his title on the line against Fabian Edwards, defending that belt for the first time. Vanstinas, a 33-year-old, was born in the Netherlands but was raised in Spain. Of course, won that title from Johnny Edwin in his last fight in July by a rear naked choke, just 7 seconds left in the fight. Edwin was cruising, had that fight in control the whole time, 4 rounds in his pocket, ends up getting choked out in the last 10 seconds. Just a heartbreaking loss, and I hope that he was going to get the first fight against Vanstinas when we saw that he was re-signed last week. I thought maybe they could set that up. That would be the first battle. That would have been a great one for this card as well. But instead, he fights a different opponent that he beat formerly, and that is Fabian Edwards, a 33-year-old who was born in Jamaica, raised in the UK, who lost to Johnny Elblin for a second time last October on the Battle of the Giants card, but then rolled through that PFL tournament this year to win the middleweight tournament for 2025. 3 great wins by him, very impressive performances throughout. So now he's going to be fighting for this main title. Again, like I said, these guys have battled before back in September of 2020 in Bellator. Vanstinas won by split decision over Fabian Edwards. So can Edwards return the favor and get that gold, or does Vanstinas hold on to that belt and then have another rematch afterwards against Johnny Elblin? We'll find out in March for the PFL. We'll also have a featherweight battle on that card between AJ McKee and Adam Boric. Now, McKee was just re-signed a few weeks ago. I talked about that on last week's show. 30-year-old from Cali is 23-2 in his MMA career. He's coming off a unanimous decision win over Ahmed Magomedov after returning back down to featherweight. Of course, he fought on that pay-per-view a couple years ago against Paul Hughes. Did not go his way. Comes back down to featherweight and gets a win back on the record, and now is in the good mixes trying to climb his way towards that featherweight title. Going against Boric, the 32-year-old from Hungary, of course, is 20-3 in his MMA career. He lives in the U.S. now, has trained there for many years, coming off a win over Jeremy Kennedy by majority decision in June. That was a good rebound win for him after losing in the first round of the PFL featherweight tournament this year against Jesus Pinedo, where he got dropped in the first round. He's making his return after a couple of years off due to injury. Lost that fight and comes back and gets the majority decision in June. Now fighting against one of the best in the division, and AJ McKee. Now I'm surprised when they announced this fight. You know, I thought when they re-signed McKee that he'd be fighting for that featherweight title next year. I thought he'd be fighting against Khabulaev, who won that 2025 tournament over Pinedo. But we found out this week why he's not doing that. Because Khabulaev got popped for a positive test the last fight of that tournament against Jesus Pinedo, day of the tournament, something that just finally came back to tests, was just within the last couple days of their doping policy with their former partner. Now gets him suspended for a year. He is stripped of that title. He is, kicked out of that tournament afterwards. It's ruled that he did not win, didn't get the title, has to return the bonus. Khabulaev suspended for a year now for testing positive before he fought Jesus Pinedo. So that's why, obviously, he's not matching up against AJ McKee for a featherweight title. Maybe instead they should have put McKee for a title against Pinedo because, of course, he made it to those finals. Did not win, but obviously was cheated by this positive test. But he's locked into a fight now as well against Ispulaev on the February 7th card, we learned as well this week. So maybe because of those moving parts, not knowing what was going on with Khabulaev, they probably got wind of that earlier. And as they're trying to figure things out, said, you know what, we'll kind of put this on the back burner for now, put these guys against other people, as we see now with Pinedo against Ispulaev and McKee against Boric. And then if they make it through those fights, probably see them in the second quarter, maybe third quarter of the year, fighting for the featherweight title for the PFL is my prediction. But we'll see if that comes to fruition. Well, that's going to do it for me here on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano for the year of 2025. Thank you to everybody who's partaken of the show over these last 4 months as we've been getting it off the ground, getting it going, and talking about combat sports. We appreciate it. I thank you for the time that you have spent. Hopefully you have a happy holidays, no matter what you celebrate. Hope you're enjoying it. Hopefully you have some great celebrations with friends and family and have a good close to 2025 and even better start to 2026. I will be back in the new year with you. Whether you're following us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe. That way you find out once the show is back. Give some comments, give some input. Let me know what you like, what you didn't like, so we can make some changes and make it even better for everybody who's taking part of this show. And make sure you follow me on social media. Follow the show on social media. I'm at On Air Mafia just about everywhere. But as far as the show, follow it at Fighting Lines on X and at Fighting Lines Pod on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. Because over the next couple weeks, maybe if something breaks and something's big enough, I'll give you, a short little video, talk about the things that are going on because, we can't just leave things sitting there and wait for the new year. We got to talk about it if it's big enough. So make sure you follow me on social media. I'll try to still hook up with you guys through the end of 2025 if we find something that we really need to hit on before we get into the new year. But thanks so much for all the time you've taken with me over the last 4 months. But we're looking forward to a big 2026, not just for the show, but for the combat sports that we all love to follow and watch and take part in. Thank you so much, everybody.